All right, looks like we're live. Welcome to another edition of TechChat Tuesday, and this one is for January 31st, 2023. My name is Ken Rimple, and with me today is Drew DeCarme. Hi, Drew.
Hey, Ken, what's up?
Drew is an expert in front-end technologies for us at Chariot, does a whole lot of consulting for us in things like single-page applications, server-generated apps, and a bunch more. And so we brought him on today because we're going to talk about some things that he's been looking at this year that have kind of surfaced that are technologies he's watching and paying attention to, and things he's kind of keeping his eye on for UI and UX development, things like that. We're going to start off, as we usually do, talking about some of the content that we have. So if you go to chariotsolutions.com and you go to our resources menu, there's our blogs, or you just hit chariotsolutions.com/blog. We have a couple of new articles since the beginning of the year. I've already mentioned the Innovation Center article by Tracy Wilson-Rossman last week. We started out with 3 new posts, and 2 of them by Keith Gregory, who does a lot of our AWS and cloud technology consulting. He's one of our experts there. One of them is about, instead of using JSON and data lakes, taking a look at different content types instead of JSON, such as Avro or, what is it on here? Parquet, Orc, Avro. And so he talks about like why it would make more sense to use more of a structured type than JSON itself. So that's a good reader if you're looking into like how you're dealing with data formats and transferring data back and forth for moving data in a data engineering setting or what have you. You can take a look at that blog article for some background. And then he had a follow-up article as he recommended Avro as one of the better solutions for a lot of cases. And he talks about a couple of different ways to approach building Avro schemas. So either through Java, Python, and the Python ones are Apache Avro and Fast Avro. So that gives you some code samples to kind of get started and kick the tires. And then Tracy Wilson-Rossman, again, our chief marketing officer, and she also runs Journal My Health. A true MVP, minimum viable product, enables agility in product development. And so this is a write-up on, what the benefits are. Oops, sorry. Sorry, I never get a call. Let me put on my Do Not Disturb. What the benefits are of using an MVP to help kind of suss out what you're looking for in a product. All right. Let me just turn on Do Not Disturb. Okay.
Love those articles from Keith.
Yeah, they're very good.
Sometimes they just go completely over my head.
Mine too. He's been really helpful to me. I've been working on this ECS and EKS template for us and kind of like some internal work. And every time I ask him questions, he's like the AWS guru. Every little weird thing you can't find, he's like, look over here. I'm like, oh, Keith.
Yeah,
I clone your brain.
You never assume that he's not going to have an answer.
Yeah. So good man. All right. So a couple things then. Philly ETE is coming up, Philly Emerging Technologies for the Enterprise. And we have one of our speakers for Philly Emerging Technologies for the Enterprise here today. Drew, what's your talk about?
So I'm going to be talking about parallelization in the browser. So I'm specifically going to, I guess in a more informal sense, I'm going to throw as much as I possibly can at the browser and hope it doesn't crash. So I think there's just there's a good amount of misunderstanding or misuse, I think, in just asynchronous processing for a lot of the things that happen on the main thread. So I kind of want to explore it, talk about the history, talk about more of just an awareness type deal. But the overall concept is like we're working our browser way too hard. We need to spin up some more threads to do some processing intensive tasks that somehow need to be on the client. So,
yeah, that event loop gets completely myrtleized, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. And then with all of the, so I was just watching a presentation by Michael Westrate, who's of Immer fame and MobX.
Oh, yeah.
And I was watching a talk on him, and he pulled up the performance monitor in the browser. I was like, what is this like crazy new tool?
Oh, yeah.
It's like a running like heap size, and it like helps basically visualize different how much CPU load you have. I mean, there's so many browser tools out there right now that can really help us out. So yeah, that's what we're talking about. Excited.
Cool. Awesome.
It's gonna be fun.
And we have lots of other speakers. We're kind of getting down to the while you're here, we've got almost all of our speakers acquired and in the process of being put on the site. So within the next, I'd say 3 or 4 weeks, we should have everybody sewn up. But just some great speakers, great talks. We've got like a talk by Deshaun Carter from Spring, from VMware Tanzu, talking about active multi-cloud approaches and things like that, which should be really interesting. And he's using Spring Boot as his technology for that with Data Redis and Azure Front Door as just a pattern for that one. But that'll be very interesting. We've got talks by Richard Feldman. He created the Rock programming language, and he's been on the show or on the conference multiple times. And in this one, he focuses on calling functions across languages. And so that's an interesting talk as well. If you're like into language embedding or whatever, and you're thinking maybe embedding, let's say Python inside of something, it'd be good to check this out. He has some thoughts on that. So I think Rock is one of the ones he looks at, is like how he dealt with embedding Rock in other systems as a case study. So I think that's what that is.
He's such a compelling speaker.
Oh, he's great.
A lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, truly. And so just you can look at all these. They're really, really good. So we are still in early bird. If you register now, you save some money. And if you just go to the phillyemergingtech.com, you can then follow the link to register. And right now the early bird is $425. It'll go up in a week or two. So get your tickets now, save a little money. It's in person this year, which is great. We're going to be back in person live, first time since the pandemic. We're all thrilled about that one. And we'll be at the University Science Center on Market Street in Philadelphia. We also have a live streaming option for people who can't physically make it. So it'll be our first kind of simulcast conference, as opposed to all recorded, which is what we usually done. So we're really looking forward to doing that. All right, cool. And then if you're curious about ETE and you want to see our videos from prior years, you can hit any of our playlists for individual years. We also have like a super playlist of everything that we have online from going back, I think, a decade at least. And those are just some of the playlists we have. We also have our Tech Chat Tuesdays here as well, along with a bunch of other kind of shows that we've done in the past. So you want to see the kind of stuff we produce, check it out on youtube.com/Chariot Solutions and look at our playlists.
I highly recommend last year's keynote, Cory Doctorow.
Ceasing the means of computation. Yes.
I had to watch that, I think, 3 times before I fully understood, or I could just like follow all of his like train of thought. It was really incredible.
Yeah, he's like a tech philosopher,
Yeah, it got pretty heady there for a little bit, so it was fun. It's not what you typically think about when you hear like a tech presentation.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. So I have just a couple of things, and this kind of tees up and gets us warmed up for some stuff that Drew's going to cover here. So I just have a couple of blog articles I paid attention to in the last week. This one's interesting. Ted Neward, I believe this is, Neward Associates, who's a pretty big name out there in like conferences and such, and technical writing, technical focus articles. You want modules, not microservices. And this is some of the stuff that I think is on a lot of people's minds as they're starting to develop things in the cloud more and more, or even just distributed computing more and more. You're told over and over again the monolith is the problem, and certainly a very large monolithic slab of code that runs everything has its issues, right? And over time it gets bloated and slower and difficult to debug, and the people who worked on it are gone. So I get the whole don't do everything as monoliths. Think about breaking them up. But the other end of the pendulum is, of course, microservices. So deploy a function, deploy functions for each various features that you have. And that function is deployed as a microservice with a little bit of supporting code. And then you wire a whole bunch of microservices together. Ted's perspective on this is that, he first teased up what like the major reasons are for microservices being important. Let's see, simplify cross-team coordination, because you have nice little tiny things talking to each other, streaming events, rapid growth because you've got a modular architecture and very quick deployments, etc. But some of the issues are that you start tangling a whole bunch of things together, and you've got a whole bunch of teams working on a whole bunch of different small things, each of which is very specialized in what it does. So a couple of the things that we find is that people are starting to bulk things back together into smaller not full monoliths, but smaller modules again, and focusing on deploying modules which have multiple features that are all related in a single deployment, which makes it easier for them to work on their own, makes it easier to test them as that unit. They can share some code, the foundational code that they need, and you can have a little bit more expertise. So in any given particular module across multiple developers. So this is him kind of teeing that up in an article. You can check that out. It's at blogs.newardassociates.com. We'll have a link in the show notes. So it's a kind of an interesting one here.
Got a lot of the same parallels that we typically use in the front end for like module-based workspaces.
Yep.
So we tend to have like their own development scripts inside them. I mean, they're often abstracted away from like your general application, but you can think of them like component libraries or other small libraries that do a certain thing, and those can be deployed on their own too. They can be used as sort of separate bolt-ons to the application or used in like parallel to the application. So
right,
nice.
Yeah,
in the way.
Yep. And so then you can consider if you've got like a module for, let's say, user management on the front end with its chunks of components that are being used for that feature and all the service calls and the APIs and such, then you can do the same thing as a service that's deployed with the number of features on it as more of a module as opposed to a microservice. So that's kind of what he's talking about there.
Yeah, there's been, I mean, I've seen this architecture a little bit more, especially on the front end.
Yeah.
Where there's, let's say that you're developing something that has like an API in it. A lot of teams now will create just a module that is like a JS client to be able to interface that API either through like TypeScript.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I think there's people who don't really use authentication as a service. So like Okta or Auth0, they tend to make their user module something that you can deploy on their own. You can deploy to different, authentication servers. So like that's all like, I mean, all that somehow needs like either programmatic interaction or actual client user interaction. So again, it can be deployed to multiple places. I like this.
Yeah.
Because I'm biased. I've been working for like this for a while. So
I mean, it's just good design, good component design and architectural design. Okay. Then cutting a little closer to the front end, and at least to JavaScript anyway, is TypeScript. So TypeScript 5.0 seems to be a pretty big release. There's a beta right now of that. And so I'm just going to scroll to the sample, like TypeScript 5 features. But Drew, have you taken a little bit of a look at this?
I have not. This is the first news I've been hearing of TypeScript 5, but okay. I'm on the bleeding edge. I think that the more TypeScript, the better. So I download it immediately and then I look at the docs afterwards. So I'm always I think there's just so much value in TypeScript. You're never going to hear me not use it.
You're never going to hate it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's such like a holy war whether you should use TypeScript or not. But I find that there's so many benefits to it.
Don't you find less and less people fighting it? I find that like if you've done any of it, I mean, yes, I'll say the one thing about TypeScript that sometimes makes it difficult is sometimes you're wrestling with some type math, right? Yeah. Or you've got some really weird interfaces aren't really like sussed out well enough for you to understand it. That you're digging around Googling for like the right type, right side, because even the IDE can't figure it out. Yeah. So there's a little of that. It's nothing like Scala, but it is confusing a little bit sometimes, but it saves you a lot in the end. And it's it still gives you ECMAScript compatible code because it has to run inside the JavaScript runtime, but it adds that extra level of type safety and, good good design of your objects.
Oh, dude, I love it. Like, I mean, it reduces my unit tests. I think a good unit test.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, it's just there's so many things that you can do out of the box with it that reduce the overall like time to development or time to getting your code out. It's like I'm not even going to debate the benefits of it, but I love it. I think it's great.
Point counterpoint. I hate it.
We can sit here all day and talk about this.
So a couple cool things though. So they're implementing decorators. Now you have something you're going to talk about the TC39 committee in a minute, which sounds like a UFO project, but it's actually the committee that determines what goes into JavaScript. And decorators are coming out for that. But so in the beta, because they closely align with where the committee goes with their standards, is a decorator feature. And the decorators you can think of if you're a Java person as like annotations as one way of doing decorators. It's basically you kind of annotate your code with features. And so they go into an example here where they want to like have let's see here, a logged method. Ultimately, I'm just going to the example itself rather than trying to understand the code here. But there's a decorator that says this method will be wrapped with logging or what have you, or at least it's noted as a log method, whatever they're doing in this sample. And so you've got these annotations, and those annotations are built by setting up functions that then work with and rewrite the code that was in the original method, right? So you basically, your replacement method would do a console log, do the original method call of whatever the arguments are, and then do a closing call and then leave. So this is kind of like advice or AOP in the Java world. Annotations are a way of adding functionality around instead of before, after your functions, which is kind of cool. I believe, though, if I'm not wrong,
their docs are super conversational.
Yeah. Do you know? I'm pretty sure decorators have to use with classes, but I'm not 100% sure about that.
I don't know, man.
You're just seeing this for the first time, so this is not a quiz.
Yeah. Decorators aren't really. I mean, they were kind of popularized when Angular came out.
Yeah,
who came out
for sure.
And they were like kind of the first ones to jump on it. But at that point, there was kind of two distinct methods about going to use decorators.
Mm-hmm.
The governing body hadn't really figured out what they wanted to do for it.
Yep.
So it's like Angular was implementing something before it was actually I think they were just taking this big old bet. So now that it's starting to level out now, I think there is some consensus around it. So yeah, I mean, TypeScript is usually there. So I know for a fact they only implement things that are going to be approved. They're not going to like implement any stage 2 or stage 1 proposals, which I'll talk about later.
Yeah. We'll hold off on that.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty funny that we're just getting to it now. The other person, I forget his name, who proposed another version of this with the TC39 community. And it comes to me right after we're done talking to this whole podcast, I'm sure. But he was recommending like a metadata approach. So you would add a metadata property to your objects, and you would put your quote unquote decorators inside of that. And those were the two competing modes when Angular 2 came out. And then, they took the bet. Nishiko Havery took the bet that there was going to be annotations like this. Very interesting that they ended up being this particular one. So, and all the decorators are typed and so on, so you can really kind of like narrow these down.
I got to pour over this, man.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Whoops, and then I lost it. There we go. Decorators are one thing. We've got, this is interesting. Enums normally are numbers, right? In JavaScript, they just turn into like ordinal numbers. In TypeScript, you can have enums that are unions. Now every enum is a union. So the idea behind that is you can do like subsets of types like this, right? You couldn't do that with standard enums that didn't know what to do with them. But if you make a union enum, then you can make like a subset of all the colors, which are primary colors. Why am I pointing at the screen while you're looking at me? But anyway, the point being, you got this, type primary color.
I knew what you were doing.
See? But anyway, so now you basically have this ability to kind of use a subset of types of an enum, which is kind of cool.
That's crazy. Yep. So there's another way that they released in like 4.8 where you can type your own union out. So you could iterate through keys of a interface or a type.
Oh, wow.
And you can interpolate those to create like one big union. So there's a specific methodology I did in creating some like type safe design utilities. You have a couple declared colors like primary, secondary, whatever. You can loop through those keys, and then you can take all of their descending keys as like primary bold, primary text, primary, all that. You can create this long union that you could type the parameters of a function with. And like it's a very expressive way of just being able to say, all right, I want this specific color. But this is crazy. Enums have always been kind of like this weird thing that I never really used too much, and and like you can't really share them. Like you need to actually like build because they're not necessarily a JavaScript. It's just a regular like string.
Right.
So it's interesting to see like some more progress on this, but this is a very interesting contrived example that they put up here.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of things you would think about enuming, sometimes they get driven by data, which kills the enum concept at all. So, but for, building APIs that are reusable with some, options and features, for sure, this is interesting. And they have like a whole, the change on GitHub that did the implementation, they said to take a look at as they're kind of putting together documentation. There's a bunch of flags around module resolution. So like now there's like this concept of module resolution property, module resolution bundler, something about like node-based bundling. I don't know anything about this stuff, but I'm sure if you flip through this, you might recognize some things that could maybe simplify your builds. Because I know you were dealing with like Node.js module resolution versus Common.js module resolution in some of your package builds. So maybe this helps with that. It'd be interesting to see.
I'd have to check it out. I mean,
who knows?
If you use everything with Node Next or Node, I forget what the next one is, like Node Future or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Everything has to be appended with a .js.
Yes.
So there's no concept of like these barrel files at the bottom of your. It's I don't know, man.
I know.
I need like 4 hours to go through all this stuff.
What's really funny is like this stuff always changes every year. I look at it and go, and it's still complex and how? So I don't know. You have to see. There is something they said about this though. There was something about export type star.
Mm-hmm.
So now you can do stuff like this, which I'm looking at for the first time. When TypeScript 3 introduced type-only imports, the new syntax was not allowed an export star from module or export star as NS from module. So now you can say export type star as blah from blah. So
yeah, you'd have to extract the type out. If you wanted to export the type out of any file, you'd have to
import the type.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to individually export the type. And now I guess it looks like you can use a wild card or just like I don't even know what they call it, like an all iterate or an all thing. I don't know.
So basically, it would simplify those if you were setting that kind of stuff up.
Yeah. If you're doing a lot of times you have like a type file, or maybe you have like some types that are co-located with a feature.
Right.
Unless you want to just export all of them, which you typically do in barrel files. If you wanted to only import a few functions and then export like a type, you'd have to do that manually.
Yep.
So or manually, just like very, I don't know. The syntax is a lot more terse.
So, I mean, that's a smattering of them. They've done something really interesting here. So, like if you're doing code completion with the code completion engine, if you're doing like some sort of a switch against an enum, the code completion will scaffold out all the enum elements for you, which is kind of cool.
What? So do that. Wait, is there a video there?
Yeah, watch. Ready? Woo! We're going to play case. Check it. How cool is that?
See, that's what I needed. I'm used to writing like never exhaustive check guards at the end of the sentence here. Mm-hmm. And I know there is a TypeScript feature that will actually blow up if you don't consider all of the different options that are on that.
Right. It's a compiler flag, isn't it?
I've been using switch statements for like discriminated union type checking for a lot of like really complex state on the front end, and it's been incredible because it tells me exactly where I'm making mistakes.
Nice.
Albeit small mistakes, but I do make them every once in a while.
If you were a chatbot or chat GPT, you'd make no mistakes, but it would be Mad Lib, so it'd be useless.
I'm actually going to talk about GPT. I want to get into that.
I really do too, actually. There's been such a debate. Not thrilled about it. So speed, memory, and package size optimization. So apparently they've sped up compared to TypeScript 4.9. Build time's a little faster, startup time's a little faster, etc. And the package size, look at the TypeScript package size. It's down 58% of what it was in 4.9. That's nice too. So anyway, cool stuff. Check out the beta. I'm sure it'll be live within a couple months beyond beta form, and we'll all start getting in our frameworks and platforms we're using after that. It's good to know about that. Okay, so I'm going to throw to you now because we're going to talk about stuff that you've been checking out. So I'm going to stop my screen.
And I just present, right?
Yep. You can pick the screen you want or the window you want or whatever you want to do.
I think it's this one. I believe it's this one. Yes. Okay. Can you see it?
Yeah, you might want to make the font a little bit bigger, but yeah. There you go.
All right. That's good. So I want to first start out with I think that there is a lot of like nebulous understanding of how things actually go into two of my most loved languages here. So CSS and JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we hear about all like the Node Next, or a lot of that stuff is pretty much well documented. But I always thought that CSS for some reason was this sort of like nebulous concept. Like, how do these new CSS features get created? Like, are we still on CSS3? Like, is that still something that we use? Like, is it HTML5? Like, how are these standards created? So what I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit is just what goes into each of these specifications. Because I don't really think a lot of it is good knowledge. So I told you I'd get into ChatGPT. I went on and I was like, okay, where do I start with this? Because I have a general idea of how everything works, but I don't necessarily know, all the ins and outs. So I go on, I Google, I'm like, okay, Google, what's the process for adding a proposal into the CSS spec? And I get a lot of like personal blogs, like I get a lot of like differing articles that don't really have it. I'm talking about like I want to be able to get to like the root core of it, right? Because you can subscribe to blog articles, you can subscribe to notifications, but like where is this mysterious, governing body that exists in the ether that comes up with all these like different specifications?
Right.
I had no success going on Google. So I was like, oh, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use my new favorite tool. I'm going to use ChatGPT. So I went on ChatGPT and I typed in how to, like, I'm not sure if I have it up right now. What did I say? I said, what's the process for adding new features into the CSS specification? And what it shows you is what it spit out right here. And I thought this was spot on. Like, this is exactly how it works.
What you're talking about, this right here in front of CSS?
Right here. This right here is what ChatGPT did. So
okay,
it's interesting because there's a lot of I have a lot of like question-based answer solutions that I usually like go to Google. But for some reason, recently I've been really going to ChatGPT because I don't have to click on anything. Like, I get a very concise description. I mean, again, I would like more sources, so I actually followed it up and I said, all right, where can I find these proposals on the internet? That's exactly what I said right here. And then
wow,
a bit of text.
Check it out.
So, I mean, I'm not going to claim that this was me. I do have a lot of the knowledge here, but this I thought was a very concise write-up of exactly what to do. But regardless of ChatGPT, if you like it, you don't like it. But I think, we're going to have to adapt and evolve with it. So I'm actually been using it a lot.
Well, just to break in here, I think actually that's a good use of it, right? So you're asking it to tell you something, and what you have to do normally with the browser is go to all these primary sources, dig into the right part of their pages, find that one chunk of content, and it's already done all the AI to put together the categorization of what things are. So when you ask, it knows. It can go through its tree of information to say this is exactly what you want. So I can totally see that as a good use of it. For sure.
It's been nice. It's been really nice. I mean, we just went to the Poconos with some friends. And my friend's wife is a dentist. And she used ChatGPT. She had this new implant that came out, and she went to ChatGPT after I told her about it. And she just had described this implant, and she got a pretty concise write-up on, what this implant does and like how different it is from like it's scary. It's scary how good this tool is. So use it the way that you want, don't use it the way that you want, but I find it to be it's very time saving.
Okay, so given that, you've got some steps here, right?
Yeah. So first is, most with everything is a proposal, right? Someone says, hey, I want to build this feature out, right? This is something that I think CSS absolutely needs. So what they do is, this proposal is usually either by a browser or some sort of like other working group. And they say, hey, Google Chrome thinks that we want to be able to add this to the CSS spec. The next is discussion. So basically there's this big consortium, this body. So that's the the W3 consortium right here. So let's see if I can go to it. And this is the WC3 consortium. So this is the worldwide consortium. And then they have these participating members that go in and they say, hey, I'm going to review this proposal, right? And typically the proposals come out of the spec, not necessarily like they come out of the group, not necessarily out of like from the ether. A lot different than what JavaScript is. So, we have people from Adobe. There's a lot of Google in here, a lot of Microsoft. I did see, I did see Mozilla. You know, some of the usual suspects is what you normally see here, but there's a couple people from Apple, so on and so forth, right? So all of these people, this is the governing body. It's what did it say at the top here? 100 and something members, 147 participates, including 14 invited experts, right? So these are the top dogs. This is the overall governing body of CSS. So, and then basically what they do is they have this big discussion, and they talk about how, you know, is this something that's viable to the specification, to the overall specification. They collect their feedback, and then they make changes, right? So pretty much any proposal, right? You come up with an idea, you present it to the governing body, and then they write the specification on it. So they'll refine it, and then once they refine that, they'll actually go into implementing it. So a lot of what you see is either sponsorship by like one browser group, so like Chrome or Mozilla. Typically, you know, what we have is the can I use? So this is like an indispensable tool for anyone who's using front end, and this is actually integrated into the MDN docs. But this tool right here,
can I use? Yeah, this is good.
So let's say, like, can I use Grid, right? So CSS Grid is a feature, and they have this stuff that aligns to the overall specification as well.
Right.
So the thing about this is that depending upon the sponsorship of each browser, like each browser group, they'll say, all right, this is something that I think people who use Mozilla, Firefox actually need. They'll put it behind feature flags. So Chrome is experimental, all these things that need to be manually entered. And a lot of times you see those updates happen through like your browser. So if it says Google Chrome needs an update, it's like the next iterative update that implements either like experimental flag features or, you know, actually enabling features that have been widely regarded as like sort of the next step in the governing body, right? So then you have all kinds of information right here, different tests, when it was released. So here you can basically see that Grid, the level 1 specification, is all supported across all your major browsers, and they group your major browsers. IE obviously is that no one cares about IE. It's just, I mean, I don't encourage.
I mean, is it even relevant at all anymore? I thought it was
really.
dead.
I mean, Edge is, you know, that's a WebKit-based browser, so it's
that's what took over. Yeah,
WebKit. Subgrid, I mean, this is important, right? So the subgrid is it's a specification that is something that's relatively widely accepted. But to that point, it doesn't really matter whether it's been accepted into the overall specification. It matters when browser implementation has it, right? So recently, in I think 2022 in November, the dialogue element, along with the CSS, like the backdrop pseudo element, was actually just widely accepted into all the browsers. So it was still part of the specification, but with HTML. But it really only matters is like, what browser are you using? Can I use it in this browser? So that's why this tool right here is super, super helpful. So then getting back,
question for you: do you find that like when browsers implement the feature, they generally implement the feature as is in the spec, or do they riff on it?
So it really depends. I mean, it's up to the interpretation of the browser group, right? So I mean, if you see the reason cross-browser testing exists is because they have different prefixes.
Yeah.
It's all really up to like the implementing group. So the specification is more of like a standard way of like what should happen, and then it's up to the way that they implement it, right?
It's a roadmap that hopefully people follow.
Yeah. So like for some reason, the Flexbox specification that operates a little bit differently with overflowing scrollable containers than Firefox versus Chrome. And
interesting.
And sometimes, like, this is kind of a widely known, that's not a bug, but it's just a difference. You have to put a minimum height on a scrolling, a minimum height of 0 to make it like the height explicit, because that's how the browser engine is sort of interpreting the specification, right?
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, CSS is this really amazing language, but there's also one more level of sort of whisper down the lane that happens once there's a specification, and then how is it implemented inside of the browser, right?
Right.
So then it's standardization. They'll work to sort of refine the spec, and then it's finalization. So it's a slow moving process. It takes a while. Some of the things that were just released recently that I really like is container queries. And then like it's a new one. Container. queries. Firefox hasn't implemented it yet, right? So,
Yeah.
and then things like the has. So container queries are media queries that respond to the overall size of its container. So let's say that you have some sort of containing article element on the page that you know is 300 pixels wide. Based upon if that article element gets to be 200 pixels wide, you can set a container media query in there to respond to that 100 pixels of difference to do something only inside of that container, not necessarily inside of the overall browser.
Okay.
So they're extremely powerful. Let the patterns emerge on it for sure.
Yeah.
But something like has too, like there's always, CSS is cascading style sheets, so all things cascade down. So children don't really have a concept of parents. But the has operator allows you to see whether, let's say that you have an input that's checked inside of a general container. So you could like div has input or input with an attribute of checked. And then you could style that div, you could style that parent based upon like the state of another child element.
Okay.
That's very powerful, but browsers don't all have it, right? So what you need to do is polyfill a lot of this stuff. So there's new CSS features being released all the time, but it's really up to the browsers when they implement it and how they implement it. And then you're going back to the wonderful world of polyfills. So CSS polyfills are kind of like this new concept, but just because these features are being added, and whether, I don't know the whole process for how these things get integrated, but pretty much if you want to like snap the line at the browsers that are going to use something that are, way up to snuff, you're going to see things like I don't know, Chrome. Chrome's pretty much on top of everything. So that is CSS specs. So, and then concurrently on that other side, you have JavaScript, right? So JavaScript has a governing body. They're called the TC39. And then they also have a standard way of going about adding new features. They have a proposal which can be initiated by anybody online. So anybody can go into the TC39, which is right here. This is their GitHub. And here, they have the ability to submit different types of proposals, right? So you have 4 stages of proposals. Here's the process. Stage 0 through 4. If you ever worked with anything that has related to Babel back in the day,
yep,
I'm sure you had to add plugins like stage 1 proposal, stage 2 proposal, stage 3 proposal. So this was a process that JavaScript had implemented far beyond transpilers like Babel came to popularity. So they were saying, all right, I want to be able to use, or I want to be able to take my new modern JavaScript. I want to be able to use proposals that are in stage, given your number 0 to 3. And then I want to be able to transpile those into something that the browser is going to understand, which is much more like before modules were implemented in browsers. So stage 0 is just like, this is brand new. Like, hey, this would be a great idea. Stage 1 was saying that, hey, this actually might be a good idea. We have a champion for it. Someone's going to sponsor this and like move it through, who is part of the TC39 specification committee. And stage 2 was kind of like, hey, this is something that we really want to move forward with. We're still finalizing the API. And this is where decorators kind of hung out for a while. Anything that is stage 2 or below is still technically considered something that's not like totally solid yet, right? You can use it, you can polyfill it, you can, and I'm using polyfill right now, like people understand it, but basically you're adding functionality that mimics that same functionality that you're trying to use. So you can do all of the things with it, but be warned, like not major grade, like major incrementation, Semver software, something might change on you and you implement something. So don't rely on this, right? So that's kind of the whole, that's kind of the whole understanding of like, this is what we need to progress the language forward. And then once it hits stage 3, that's when it's like, okay, we're good on the API. We're going to work on getting this implemented. We need to get editor sign off on it. We're going to finish the tests on it, so on and so forth. So you can see in the third column under acceptance signifies saying it's complete. We don't need to make any more work on it right now. And let's just get a lot of external feedback on it. And then stage 4 is exactly like putting it into the overall language. So
I knew who that is.
Are we going to make CSS 1,000% better? I hope. I think it's making a lot of advancements right now. I mean, parent reflected CSS, like contains, has, is. There's a concept in CSS called pseudo elements, which are kind of like these bolt-on things like, hey, I want to target this div, but I want to see like what kind of state this div is in, or I want to see what kind of state this element is, or what is nested in here. I think, CSS has kind of stayed pretty stagnant for a while, but with a lot of the, I think, pushes in what clients want for the browsers and accessibility constraints as well, is actually making CSS a lot better. So we'll see. I mean, I love it. It's an own language in itself. It's something that it's got a lot of really interesting parts to it, and it's got its own architectural and scalability challenges. So really learning it, I think, is a good thing. It's always good to have one expert CSS person because, quite frankly, abstractions are good. But much like if you use a JavaScript framework and you don't know vanilla JS, then it could be a problem. So if you use something like Tailwind or use something like Bootstrap or any other CSS sort of pre-canned processors for you or frameworks, you're only going to get as much out of it as you put into it. So, understanding the fundamentals, I think, is core to like really making it work well for you.
And Jack, I would argue that you're using percentages. That's always a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, so think about this. There's a lot. Yeah, so you could use. I mean, now percentages aren't. They're not as much as, they're not as valuable as you think. You have vertical width, vertical height, you have max inline block size, you have all different kinds of properties that do exactly like Ken was saying, like that mimic these percentages. So it's starting to tie into the browser more. It's starting to really enhance accessibility requirements where, like, if you're on a browser and let's say that you have epilepsy and you don't want your contrast to change, or you don't want things to flash on the screen, or not a lot of motion to happen, you can put settings in your browser called reduced motion or low contrast or high contrast. And CSS has the ability to read all those values and then make it that much better.
But anyway, back to JavaScript.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jack.
I can talk for CSS all day.
Here he goes. Back to gold. Yeah. Rolling up CSS plus JavaScript into one component. What are you, a Vue developer? Thank you, Jack.
All right. So, yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to talk about as far as JavaScript goes. I mean, there's so much happening. I talked about the process document, and you can see what the TC39 does. And this is all from all kinds of walks of life.
Yeah.
Like I think Kent Dodds was on the TC39 for a little bit.
He might have been, yeah.
Yeah. Might have been. There's a couple new features coming soon. Temporal is a complete fix of the JavaScript date primitive. So there's a lot of cool stuff in there.
That's good.
Because dates are notoriously hard to work with in JavaScript, but there's some interesting stuff in here too. So I would definitely take a look at it.
Cool.
New methods on set rather than add and delete. There's your decorators, Ken.
Woohoo.
They're out of stage 2 and into stage 3.
Excellent.
Which is very, very nice. We'll see how those start to progress here. But yeah, typically TypeScript is some of the first people to really implement a lot of the stage 3 proposals. Yeah, there's so much in here. This is all stage 3 stuff. So,
I found I was looking for when we had the TC39 committee person come to speak at ETE. It was 2015. And I'll put the link in the show notes here for everybody. But it was Alan Werfsbach, Mozilla Research Fellow, and he has he's like one of the lead people on the spec for a number of years, and that was right when 2015 was when a lot of things were exploding for JavaScript. So I have his paper here, and I bet I could find the video. Anyway, keep going.
That's it. That's all I got for
Excellent.
CSS and JavaScript.
Okay.
But
awesome.
Did you want to talk about Qwik? Do we have time?
Yeah, I think we have some time. Why don't we talk a little bit about Qwik? So Qwik, why don't we switch back over to me, I think.
Yeah, you can take it.
Okay, cool. Let me see here.
I have to stop.
Yeah, I think it's just going to take over your world. There we go. Okay. So, yeah, there it is. That's the Philly ETE. See, we've been doing this for a while. All right. So, Qwik. Where's my Qwik link? There it is. So Qwik itself, the two people that I see are leading Qwik, one of them's name is Misko Havery, and we've interviewed him years ago too when Angular 2 first came out. He created AngularJS at Google, and then after AngularJS, he realized at some point, like everyone does at some point, my God, my framework, it's going crazy. I need to rewrite it. So it was like 3 years of rewrites, or 2 years. And they completely reinvented it for ECMAScript 2015 and TypeScript, and they called it Angular 2, which is now what the platform called Angular is. Google sponsored that and still sponsoring that for a number of years. But then eventually, I guess he stepped down from being the lead. I remember that happened like 2017, 2016. He stepped down from being the lead on Angular and gave it to someone else on the team who was very talented. And was kind of like, like an emeritus, so to speak, on the project. And then I guess at some point he went to Builder.io or created Builder.io with someone from a team called Ionic. Now, Ionic did a lot of mobile first kind of mobile application web, basically embedding a browser in a mobile app kind of, front ends. So you could deploy kind of like with PhoneGap, if you remember PhoneGap and Cordova. It's the same kind of thing. So Ionic is like a smart framework set for embedding, applications that look like a mobile app inside of a browser inside of a phone. And you can also use the same framework in a regular website. So one of the people that was developing there and him, they got together and they created Qwik. So it's interesting. If you were to stop working on Angular and put your head up out of what you were working on and look around in 2022, 2023, you would probably think about maybe changing to a component-driven approach as opposed to components being part of an overall platform. And it looks like that's what we have here. There's a component approach, and it's very similar. They use JSX just like React does. So there's JSX syntax for the templates, which I think, Drew, you and I were talking about. This is like kind of like the table stakes, as you were saying, right?
Yeah. I mean, JSX, it's nothing more than syntactic sugar. So you can plug it into whatever conventions you have in your framework. So like the ubiquity of JSX, and now that I'm looking at it, the hooks model, sort of like this shareable functionality that you can import in any component. Like I said, that's table stakes. I mean,
yes, it is.
You're looking at these days.
And, the other thing their foundational technology way back in the Angular stuff, can't believe it's saying way back in that too, because everything moves so quickly, is that they were using RxJS, reactive JavaScript. And I think at the time you needed something like that before we really got more event driven, and kind of the way that we're doing things in React. But it doesn't appear to me that they're using RxJS in this, which is, I think, kind of a good thing at this point. I think it had its purpose at the time.
They have the concept really kind of took over. Yeah, they have their opinions on reactivity. So if you click on the concept,
thank you. Yeah.
So there's three. There's the first is resolvable, and then the next was progressive enhancement, which I think everyone can agree with, and then reactivity. So this goes really deep.
Oh, here it is. Yeah.
Yeah, how they envision reactive state. So it's got a lot of the same sort of like, I'd say, declarative conventions as React. And when you dive deeper into the framework, it has, obviously some more opinions about how they want to manage the overall like diffing of components and so on and so forth. But I think the most interesting part of this is every single framework is like, okay, we're going to do something cool. And, you saw it with Next.js and Gatsby with server-side rendering. But you do that and you still have to hydrate the app. So Qwik is going to take it one step further. They're always improving upon one sort of like sticking point for a framework. Now they have this concept of resumability where they believe that they don't want to rehydrate the application because they have to build all the same data constructs, right? So what they're talking about is let the server do as much as possible and then just pick right up after that on the client. So again, saving more time. But we're talking like fractions of a second. So but I mean, large applications, who knows? I mean, this stuff is just progressing at the rate of the speed of light here.
Yeah, they're saying basically that this thing scales in terms of it's a large app or small app. It's pretty much instant start. I guess after the initial chunk of work gets done in the initial hydration, perhaps. But that's one thing. The other thing I noticed is that they have this thing called Qwik City. I don't know where they get these names from. Right. So Qwik City is like their set of APIs that you might use: routing, layout, data fetching, things like that, static site generation, prefetch. Looks like all of the things that might move rapidly faster than Qwik itself are in a separate project, which is kind of smart and interesting. The meta framework. So here it goes. So it says, we call it a meta framework for Qwik. Qwik City is to Qwik what Next.js is to React, what Nuxt is to Vue, or SvelteKit to Svelte. Interesting.
The framework.
Yeah, it's the framework on top of the component-driven platform of Qwik. So it seems like that they've done a lot of good stuff with it. The one thing I'll say about Mishko is he does not just throw something out and ignore it. He lives, breathes, and suffers through it and gets it done. And so I think if he's putting his time into this, it'll see itself through to the finish line for sure. I'm very curious about who Builder.io is. If this is like a consulting firm we created and he needed a platform for it and iterate a platform, but I'd love to find out where this came from, what the germination of this system is.
Got to monetize somehow, Ken.
Yeah, right. It's like the Golden Arches versus the Golden Arcs and Coming to America. It's like it's React, but it's not React. Because if you look at the docs, I believe it's in here, or maybe it's in the main thing. Oh, that's why, because they built their own drag and drop builder. I'll bet that's what it's for. But for Qwik itself, there's some comparison in here, comparing it to React, and of course now I won't be able to find it as I'm scrolling.
Go back, hit the back button a couple times.
Oh, was I on it already? Doesn't matter. Not important. I'll find it and put a post up.
You go to the cheat sheet on the left-hand side nav.
Oh, there it is. Thank you. Qwik versus React. Thank you for saving me. So there, like if you're looking at like the quick differences between React and Qwik. By the way, Qwik, one of the things it can do, it can fully use and access React technology. So you can use Redux in it, and you can use React components from it and things like that. Use React hooks, I believe. But it has its own flavor. So I don't know if I would just wholeheartedly dive into doing a ton of React from Qwik, because now I've got two frameworks to work with. But still, it's an interesting concept. I mean, looks like a nice thing to check out. So we'll take a look at this. We'll keep it on our radar over the next couple of months and see where it's going.
Yeah, it hasn't hit major version yet, so it's definitely still in development. I know they're doing all kinds of stuff in the background. I've been looking at some of the release change logs for it. So
yeah,
it's fascinating. Though. So they're at 16.2.
0.16.2. So they got a way to go. But I always worry about yet another framework. But
well, I think
cool.
The thing that's really important here is that yes, it's another framework, but you're like declarative UI isn't changing. Components aren't changing. Mm-hmm. It almost looks like some of the React conventions of like reusable functionality with hooks. Namespaces aren't changing. A lot of this, I think, is really just the sort of the next step or the next improvement on it. And it's not where it was like back in the day, like 3 years ago, where you had like Angular and then you had Vue and now you have Svelte. I mean, these are all kind of, they're here to stay, right? SvelteKit is really booming right now. So like there's different ways of doing it, but there's going to be new frameworks on top of what's already there to make it better or faster or more reliable, right? But it's important to note that this is all for a very specific use case, right?
Yep.
You can't just shoehorn it into what you have. Like you have to have a valid use case for it.
Yeah, it has to fit the parameters of what you're doing. And they do, for example, static site generation and server-side rendering too. So like all the things that you would expect out of something like a Next.js, this is yet another riff on that kind of thing as well as what they're doing in their technology. So definitely want to keep an eye on. I mean, if it's the spiritual successor to Angular, and because Angular's kind of died out, and some of the Angular people look at that, and you might find it gets resurrected in terms of that way of being popular as opposed to Angular itself. You never know where this stuff's headed, but it's pretty cool looking for sure. All right. Well, thank you for that. That was a good find this week for sure. And thank you for coming on the show and talking about stuff.
Yeah.
UI stuff. Always have fun.
Yeah. I mean, look, I can talk about CSS for hours.
Oh, you know it better than anybody else I know. So I appreciate you coming on and chatting with us, Drew.
Happy to.
Yep. And looking forward to your talk. So at ETE, that's going to be fun. No pressure.
Well, no, good. We're gonna have some fun with it. We're gonna do some cool stuff.
Well, get off that UI thread, right?
Yeah,
Get off the event loop, man. Get off it.
hang out maybe with some workers.
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you very much, Drew.
All right, Ken.
We'll see you in a couple weeks.
See you, everyone.
All right.